tonight and making it available online. Also, I'd like to say the slide deck will be available online as well, so there's no need to take a ton of pictures or scribble notes or anything like that. Dave's already gone over. There's my contact information. Thank you to our sponsors. A little bit about myself. I am Paul Schroeder. I run a small consulting shop out of St. Charles called MSC Technology Consulting. If anybody needs staff augmentation or help with your existing projects, we'd love to help you out. Give us a call. I've been doing .NET development since it came out, and I've been developing in general for multiple decades. I do have a degree in computer science. I have a master's in business administration, a Microsoft certified solution developer, but I certainly don't know everything. And what I'm trying to do tonight is just share with you a little bit about the knowledge and the things that I hit, the little obstacles and things I got over as I was trying to learn Blazor myself so that I could hopefully save all of you some time. I'm going to warn you ahead of time that this slide deck is not really a slide deck, as you judge from slide decks, because it's almost like a mini ebook. I'm not going to be able to cover all the references in here. I have over 50 slides, but because it's going to be available online, what I've tried to do is make slides with links to all the resources that you will need to go off on your own. That said, I'm going to try and show you as much as possible. I did a presentation at the Xamarin.NET Developer Conference here. Some of the architectures and the things that I'm going to talk about, I won't be able to demonstrate tonight, but you can find them on GitHub here. A session that was done. This is a video that's been released as well. There's a link to the video down there. That'll cover more of what the quote-unquote enterprise architecture is. A lot of that was using code generation, which was a major theme of that talk, but not so much in this one. On kind of a more somber note, I'd like to dedicate this talk to K. Scott Allen, who we lost about a week ago now. Some of you may know him, some of you may know of him. This person was a very, very prolific writer and teacher and educator, specifically with .NET. If you've ever heard of Ode to Code, that's him. He did literally 54 courses for Pluralsight, so just a major person. Here's a blog he did on Blazor back in September. And here's a funny video if you want to look that up. So just kind of a little tribute to him. Okay, back to Blazor. What is Blazor? Blazor at its core is a feature of ASP.NET Core. So it's kind of built on top of it. As you're tweeting out your pictures tonight, I am not a fan of the shiny jackets, which is why you see the Blazor means business, and that's why I have this on tonight, because I kind of want to change that, and I want these guys to not wear these jackets anymore. Let's see, so what isn't Blazor? Blazor is not the new shiny. When I talk to a prospective client or I talk to fellow developers, this is kind of where things start. Yeah, I remember the hype about this. I remember Silverlight. I remember LightSwitch, the Windows 8 store. Blazor is just another one of those. So tonight, kind of what I want to communicate is although Blazor is very, very early, you would be considered a very early adopter to be using it now, that I found it to be really simple to use, straightforward and predictable. A very promising development experience. When I went to go do a project for a client and they let me choose the technology I wanted to, I used Blazor and we went through the timelines and everything. I ended up being on a very short project about a month ahead because it was just so easy to put together. If you already know ASP.NET Core development or you're getting there, it's not much different than that, as you'll see tonight. So everyone wants to know, is it the one? Is Blazor the one? Is it going to replace everything? Because I'm doing Angular, I'm doing React, I have to know JavaScript, I have to know back-end stuff. Maybe I'm doing Node, whatever. I'm not an Oracle, haha, but there's 1,000 ways to skin a cat, and I don't know where that expression comes from. I don't know why you'd want to skin a cat, but what you're going to see even tonight is that there is a lot of different ways you can do stuff even within Blazor. Microsoft themselves has published this roadmap. We're going to cover tonight these first two, Blazor Server and Blazor WebAssembly. But they've got plans for Blazor for progressive web apps, hybrid, native, and they also, that's when these are coming out. So Blazor Server is ready for production. This is somebody's main questions. Blazor Server is ready for production already. Blazor WebAssembly, they're going to release in May, but they're not calling it a long-term support release. So for the WebAssembly, May. If you want to experiment, if you're brave and you want to get down here, here's a few links I've provided. Blazor Electron, aka ms.blazor Electron, aka .ms web window, and then here's another GitHub package. This seems to be on a lot of people's minds. I also want to just mention that this is the way this presentation is split up. I split it up into the basics kind of in the first part. Say maybe the first hour is going to be that, or first 50 minutes, depending on how fast I go. And then we'll have like a 10-minute intermission where everyone can have a bio break, take a breath, and we'll come back and do more advanced concepts after that. And that will be a little bit more of a free-for-all, where if somebody sees a specific topic, I literally have like 40 topics we could talk about. So if there's something that's near and dear to you, let me know and we'll jump around a little bit more in the second session. Anybody see .NET Conf 2 days ago, on Tuesday? Just a handful of you. That's actually not bad from my perspective, because then this will all be brand new for you and it'll be great. What they did is they put on about 13 sessions. One of the more interesting sessions was this mobile Blazor bindings. At MSC Tech, we do a lot of Xamarin development, and so the fact that Blazor can be used for mobile development really piqued our interest. And here's a link if you wanted to experiment with that. It's GitHub Xamarin Mobile Blazor bindings. Again, this is very experimental, but it gives you an idea of like they're really pushing this. They're really investing in this. So it's probably going to be around a while. And the fact that you can write things in this syntax and have it work in all these different places and different platforms is just kind of mind-boggling. Somebody liked it so much that she got her question answered at the .NET conference the other day, and I'm sure that Robin back in the room loves that I put this slide up. How do you get started with Blazor? This is another question people have. Short answer, go to blazor.net. They'll ask you to install .NET Core 3.1. If you want to use the client-side Blazor, and we're going to get into the differences in depth between server-side and client-side, then you need to download a separate WebAssembly template, because again, that's not coming prepackaged until May or so. And you'll need a current version of Visual Studio, etc. Visual Studio for Mac, Visual Studio Code. The two flavors, server-side, client-side. Basically, this is your standard ASP.NET Core stuff, and Blazor sort of lives within it as well. It's like a layer on top almost. So that stack is really standard when you're talking about server-side Blazor. And how does it communicate between the server and the browser in this way that creates what's called a single-page application or a SPA application, which is usually used in terms of things like Angular, React, or Vue, through a channel created by SignalR. So SignalR has these messages going back and forth between the browser and the server to communicate things, and we're going to explore this in depth in our initial demo. The client-side version, the other flavor version that's coming out in May, it's technically available now if you want to mess around with it, but it's not supported for production scenarios yet. It does about the same thing, but you're replacing ASP.NET Core with WebAssembly. And this runs in the browser. So notice there's like not a server really involved there technically. Obviously you have to be able to get the code in the first place, but we'll cover that too. And it's also manipulating the DOM. So they create what's called a render tree. And just like React does, they detect the differences in the render tree, and so it can very efficiently swap out content. That's a really good question in that they're currently supporting Chrome and Edge and that, but what about Safari? I will tell you that WebAssembly is supported pretty much everywhere, and that goes back to something called the Spectre. If you remember the Spectre, the meltdown viruses, way back when, and everyone had to update their browsers. And when everyone updated their browsers and Google and Chrome came out with this new version that everyone downloaded, at that time they got HTML5 support baked in as well. At that time they got WebAssembly support baked in as well. It's supported, in short. So network latency, because you're going over a SignalR connection back and forth, it can be a little bit slower if you have a slow connection. And the idea is just like compared to not needing that communication back and forth with the server, it's going to be a little potentially slower. You won't actually notice it if you have a good internet connection, and we'll investigate some of the packets and just how big those packets are going back and forth. Technically reduced scalability, I have another piece to this slide that'll come up in a second, but a lot of the reduced scalability can be handled through memory or increasing the memory on your server. Reason is that SignalR has to track the state of every connection. Even if it's a little bit, it has to keep track of all that. You'll hear this term WASM, which is short for WebAssembly. And the idea is that your code, you can write code in C# it's going to compile down into DLLs, into these WASM DLLs, and it's going to actually download these DLLs to the browser, and that's what WebAssembly will interpret and use. Okay, on the scalability thing, let me step back here just a moment. Here's what Microsoft was saying as of Tuesday at .NET Conference. So 5,000 concurrent active users if you got 3.5 gigabytes on this size of an Azure VM. And if you've got 14 gigs, then you can support 20,000 concurrent users. That may be enough for your applications now. If you have more than that, then yes, you might worry about this as a consideration. More important for me is this idea, like when I'm programming server-side Blazor, I have full debugging experience. It's just ASP.NET Core. You're setting breakpoints. Everything's hitting on the server. When you go to do the client side, it's very limited debugging. You're using like console and the browser window. The thing that's cool is that server-side Blazor has the same syntax as client-side Blazor. What people will say is you could just take your server-side solution, and when you're ready to go client-side, basically just move it over there. And it should mostly work. We're going to expose some of the event models that are slightly different. I have a demo on the event lifecycle and what might be a little different between client-side and server-side. In May of 2020, Microsoft is saying that the debugging support for WebAssembly, so for the client side, will be much improved. So at this point, it'll become less painful as a developer to develop client-side stuff. I've even heard of people at this point developing like that server-side application and debugging it there if they have a problem, and then moving it over to the client-side project, and then it just works. So moving on. Oh, demo. Good, we like demos. Talk about the first few of these points. We're going to go through a demo here, and then we'll come back, review it a little bit, and probably cover the second half of these points. Any questions before we get rolling with the demo here? Yes. That is a really good point and question. And to clarify, yes, if you have to access a persistent store or some backend to get data, it does. If you write some independent game or something that doesn't need data from your server, no, it operates independent. But obviously, if you need to download a list of something that you don't already have offline, and we can get into local storage options and stuff later, then yeah, it has to, anytime you got to call the server, you're going to need an internet connection. So yeah, that's the question of whether it can work with or without a server. One of the cool demos that I've seen is people will take their WebAssembly files and upload it to blob storage. They'll upload it to a CDN, and then just download that, disconnect from the internet, and then you can just run it offline. But obviously, if you need to get data or you want to store something somewhere to make a useful line of business application, yes, you do need internet connection. Okay, it would probably be helpful if at this time I moved my Visual Studio to somewhere you can see it. Let's do that. We're going to try doing this from the command line. So we're going to make a Blazor server-side project. Let me move this up so you can see it as well. New Blazor. And what kind do we want? We want a server. So just that fast, we've created a Blazor server-side project. It's not going to do much, but let's see what it does. So what we're doing here is we're using this web server called Kestrel, right? This is going to allow us, as you'll see in a moment, to see basically some diagnostic information. We see that we are running. We see it's hosting this at port 5001 on localhost. So let's go see what we've got over at port 5001. A Hello World app. If you've done any Blazor development, then you will know that this counter and this fetch data pages are everywhere. Let's go ahead and click the counter, and all it does is increment, right? So what's actually going on behind the scenes here? Let's open up our Chrome developer tools, and we see we've got this information WebSocket connected to. Let's take a look at our network. Let's refresh the page. What do we see here? We see this little JavaScript piece, this Blazor server.js. And what this is doing is this is bootstrapping our Blazor application. This is what's creating that SignalR connection. And we can get into a lot of details of how all this is put together. But the main thing I want to point out is this pending here. We have this new little thing down here called a WebSocket, right? WebSocket's like remote procedure type of calls back and forth, communicating. It's setting up a messaging channel. And these are compact messages in what's called a Webpack format, which I believe is proprietary to Microsoft. Let's take a look at what some of these messages might look like. Some of this is completely irrelevant if you just want to use Blazor, but I think sometimes it's important to understand the fundamentals of how everything's working behind the scenes, especially when you come across some problems. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and refresh this page, and we're going to go over to the, where did our WebSocket go? And I'm going to go ahead and take a look at these binary messages. Do you see how big these messages are? 29 bytes, 229 bytes. We're not even talking about kilobytes, we're talking about bytes. So let's see what happens if I clear these out and I click the counter button on the page. So here we see a binary message going up. Let me take a look at this one. Bring this up a little bit. Hopefully you can see this. It's just saying like, hey, look, I have an event handler and I have a mouse, and that mouse got clicked. And here's where it was on the screen when it got clicked. And here's whether the control key was pressed, the shift key was pressed, the alt key was pressed, right? So in a message of 3 bytes, it's passing up, hey, a mouse button clicked. Coming back down, let me clear these out, make sure I get the down one. So it's 3, let's say it's 4 now. So that's going up, this is coming down. In the down message, we can see it passed a 4 back. That's all that's happening with that SignalR connection, right? Thank you. And that means that the state for that button is being persisted on the server. Remember we said how this server side is keeping track of all that SignalR connection state, and that's what the limiting factor is for the number of connections. That's what that memory is being used for, is to keep track of the client state. I hope that makes sense. Okay, let's see here. I want to do one more thing that's kind of cool, maybe 2 more things that's kind of cool here, and then we'll move on. Let's see, if we go back to here, remember we've got this thing where it said, actually it was in our console, WebSocket connected to or normalizing. All that is that goes back to our, that goes back to our JavaScript file. That Blazor server. So you just see in this JavaScript, it's just this little thing that's creating that SignalR connection. There's no, I mean, it's magic, it's awesome what's going on, but it's all decipherable what's happening. The other thing we can look at here in the console, this kind of drives home the point of client side, server side, whatever, is what happens if my server went down or I lost my connection. Application shutting down, right? Well, what happens over here in Chrome? It detects that error. And now we see SignalR attempting to reconnect. Of course, it's not going to work because I killed the server, right? SignalR is doing the work of an AJAX call to a web API. Similar to that, not necessarily. Basically, yes. It's enabling you to have this single-page application concept. And the server-side Blazor is sending these messages back and forth. The state's being maintained on the server. The client side is, again, executing all in the browser. Tonight we're going to focus on server side because that's what is released for production scenarios. But I think everyone is really more interested in the client side stuff. So you're kind of getting an early preview of what is to come. All right, where are we at on our slides at this point? So we visualized the SignalR channel. We haven't done anything with routing. The state management is something I can demonstrate along the way. Okay, let's actually open up the code that we're working with here. Visual Studio, let's open up that project that we created, CNUG 16. So here's what the code looks like. Here's where we start getting into the meat of it. You start with program. Pretty standard ASP.NET Core stuff. Let me shrink this down. Hopefully everybody can see this. We have a static void main. That's the entry point to our application, right? It's calling this create host builder. This is standard ASP.NET Core stuff. In our host builder that we're creating, it uses startup. So it's using the startup class, right? So let's open the startup class. There's an iConfiguration getting injected in the constructor. Let's not worry about that for now. Let's notice these 2 methods that are getting called, configure services and configure. So configure services is just where you're registering with inversion of control container all of the things that you want to be able to inject or use in your application. This will become a lot more apparent in our advanced demo after the intermission. But what you'll see, and I apologize, I'm covering up some of it, is it's standard adding Razor pages, right? This is just like your Razor page app, MVC, whatever. This is what adds the server-side Blazor functionality. And then down here, remember we had that weather forecast page? This is how they're doing it. You're just injecting a service called the weather forecast service, which lives over here, and all it's doing is just some dummy data basically, and then generating some random numbers. And that's what's doing the temperatures and whatnot. Okay, down here in configure, something else that's kind of interesting and you should be aware of is this concept of the environment or iWeb host environment. And again, configure and configure services are called by the framework automatically for you. So what they're doing is they're using this idea of, do I have a development environment or do I have a different environment? And depending on that, they're going to show a different error page. So if I'm in development, it's okay to show all the errors and the details of what line an error happened on and maybe the call stack and stuff like that. But if I'm not in development, I don't want to show that. And there's other uses for this that I'll show later. But how do I know in this application what environment I'm running in? The answer to that is there's this launch settings JSON file. And it can say, if I'm running in IIS, or say IIS Express down below, then I'm going to say that I have a development environment. If I'm running down here, this would be what Kestrel would pick up on. It's also set to development. To kind of drive this point home, let's maybe change one of these. Let's change this to CNUG is fun, right? All right, so this will be for Kestrel. This will be for IIS Express. But of course, we need a way to surface this information, right? So to do that, let's go and dive into a page where we'll actually see some of what's going on here. So this is the Hello World page. You remember when we first started up the app, it just came up with Hello World? Let's put in some code that's going to show us what environment we're running in. So that's just a quick little code snippet I've got just for tonight's demo. This is Blazor/Razor syntax, right? You've got a using statement, so I'm importing a using. That page up there is routing. Just a slash means it's the root of my page. If I wanted a page to answer to more than one route, you can add multiple routes. So let's add a couple here. Foo is always a good one. CNUG. Oh boy, I have a lot of trouble typing on a laptop without my big keyboard. Okay. Down here, this is just HTML, which isn't apparent because there's no HTML there, so let's add a little bit. And if we wanted to take this, let's add another little span tag or something. And let's give this a color. Obviously, you'd want to use a style sheet. Purple's a good color tonight. And let's take this and make sure that this thing to our right is within our tag. What you're seeing here, this little thing is basically binding. That's your binding syntax. And we're binding to current environment. What is current environment? Take a look down below. In our code section, so you can put a code section right in the page. I don't like doing it this way. I like using, they're not really code behinds. It's like the view model in an MVVM pattern. And we'll show that in the advanced demo. But you can do this. Some people prefer it. So we're creating a variable called current environment. We're overriding an event called onInitialized. And in that event that we're overriding, which will be called by the runtime, we are setting the value of that current environment variable to this environment name. And where do we get that environment name from in this env? We injected this thing called iWeb host environment. So the idea is that you have these services that you have access to, you inject them where you need them, and then you just make use of them down below, right? Let's see how this works out. Hopefully it compiles. Let me go ahead and make sure it compiles. Did we get output yet? Okay, so I'm going to run it here in IIS Express. And I'm running it from the command line there. And I think we still have our other browser window open. Let's reload our page. So here we're at the counter page. That says development because we're at the root. You see how it had responsive design built in because it knows it's kind of small? My menu went away. Current environment, CNUG is fun. Current environment development. These, it's the same thing, but it's using different settings depending on the profile of where it's running. So you can imagine when you publish to production or staging or whatever, you could have different settings that apply. It is indeed purple, which is probably hard to see on this screen. The other thing we talked about, state management. Remember, we've got this counter. That's 6. What happens when I move off the page and come back? It's lost. That's just the way it's programmed. That's not, and we'll get into this whole, there's, like I said, many ways to skin a cat. There's 4 ways to handle application state at least. We'll talk about that a little later. So let me go ahead and shut this down. Let's review where we're at. Any questions so far? Is everybody still? All right, so that's shutting down. Let's check our slides. Probably time to move on. We're about 30 minutes in. So let's review real quick. What did we see? We saw we have this little JavaScript thing that gets downloaded and bootstraps our Blazor application, right? Bootstraps what? A WebSocket connection. Shows pending. We examined some data that we sent when we clicked a button that went up through that SignalR channel. And if we were looking at the weather forecast data coming down, it might look something like that. We looked at just a number coming down on the counter. We killed the server and we saw what happened. We saw it tried to reconnect that SignalR connection. Now, one of the questions that I keep getting over and over is, we're interested in making this offline. How could we do this in an offline app? Is this viable for that? The answer is that you'd use local storage. So on the client device, here's 3 different packages. I didn't want to pull a favorite, but there's always a lot of ways to do things, and everyone's got their way. They all kind of boil down to about the same sort of APIs. You're putting a value in storage, you're taking a value out of storage, and you're getting notified when something in storage changes, right? And this is standard HTML5 storage APIs. What is the difference here? Somebody else kind of did the JavaScript or whatever. It's being wrapped so you don't have to do it. We're not writing JavaScript to do this. We're calling this stuff. It's all C#. That is really the big advantage of Blazor, is that you can use JavaScript when you need it as needed, but it's not the main character in your applications. You're not a polyglot programmer. You're not somebody that's programming in multiple languages to solve a problem. For people like myself, I've done a number of JavaScript applications over the years. I've done JavaScript before there was jQuery. I've used jQuery, the newer libraries that are out, and they're all good, and some people love them. But I love C#, and I love to just keep programming in C# if I can. I'm much more efficient at it. I have a code generator that generates a lot of code for it, so I try and stay there when I can. There's one more thing I want to mention. If you are, I think it's on a different slide, but while we're here, there's also a way where when you're storing things that it's more encrypted, right? So if you're dealing with health-related stuff, and it's sensitive, you might want to make sure that you're not storing that unencrypted. Okay, we talked about the environment and different uses for the environment. Here's a few more ideas for it. If you are using application insights or something else to track your events, to your telemetry, you can set developer mode true if you're in development, and that would then push your events through faster. You'd be able to check out if things were happening as you're debugging, right? We mentioned using this to pull in different settings. We talked about how you can, well, we didn't. You can control the diagnostic logging level. In the advanced demo tonight, I'm going to show you how I'm logging a ton of stuff that I would never really want to log in production. It's really just for tonight to demonstrate what we're doing. You can use it to send minified versions. If I'm in debug mode, I might not want a minified version of JavaScript, but if I'm in a production mode, I want to make sure the minified version of my file goes down. Okay, everybody loves a quiz, right? I'm going to see if everybody's paying attention. Which one between server-side and client-side is going to have faster execution? client. Which one's going to load faster initially? You guys are right. So the WebAssembly is not going to have that SignalR connection, right? So it's going to be faster. But the first time, server-side will be faster because what has to happen on that WebAssembly version, the client-side version, is they have to download that .NET Mono runtime that first time. And they've got that size down. It's just two megabytes. I think they've got it down to like 1.7. They might even get it smaller. But you're talking about a whole runtime coming down. So the first time, but the second time somebody's using it, they've already got it. So they don't have to download it that second, third, fourth time. Access DB context. Oh, I shouldn't have even given that to you because that's one of my favorite questions. You cannot access DB context from WebAssembly. Why? Because it's not, because the WebAssembly is not server-side. You need to be server-side to access it. Your WebAssembly or your client-side, think of it this way. I can't do, hey Hedro, how you doing? Welcome. Glad you could join us. You cannot do anything on the client side that you could not otherwise do in JavaScript. Does that make sense? So think of it that way. You're kind of sandbox, even though you're writing in C# code. It's kind of like a weird thing, like I am writing in C#, why can't I? It has to do with the architecture. Okay, we talked about this WebAssembly support a little bit, and we confirmed that it's available in all major browsers. Also, if there was something where you did have a really resource-constrained client, then you can use server-side because, again, it doesn't need all that WebAssembly, and all the processing is being handled on the server side. Designed to work offline, WebAssembly, because it can operate without that network connection until you need new data, right? So if you want more about the DB context, Dan Roth on Tuesday's talk, about 1 hour, 46 minutes into the Welcome to Blazor talk, he talks about why and how that all works. Okay, I think we're wrapping up and we're about ready for intermission. Now, here's a shameless plug, CodeGen Hero. This is one of our products at MSC Tech, and this does code generation for an enterprise architecture. So if you could think about generating your repository classes, your interfaces, your mappers. It even generates a web API. If you're doing mobile development, it generates observable object classes, mappers, SQLite data classes, etc. And the thing here is, I know everyone's signed up in the back of the room, but we're also giving away licenses to CodeGen Hero for everybody that's here tonight. We really appreciate you coming out. So feel free to go to codegenhero.com and register, check it out, etc. The idea is that you generate most of the code. If your requirements change, you simply regenerate, right? So you can have a whole enterprise architecture framework stood up in a day instead of months. It also helps with the offline mobile sync. And with that, let's go ahead and take a break. Feel free to, as Dave was talking about, tweet out your favorite Twitter handles. And let me know, stop me if there's something that you definitely want to make sure we cover in the advanced scenario, and we'll be able to bounce around a lot more. Yes, question? Is there a way to encrypt the messages that are going back and forth through SignalR? Which, as long as you're using, like he's saying, TLS, or think of it as HTTPS, they would be encrypted, is a short answer. The Webpack that's going across is kind of Microsoft's proprietary thing. If somebody hijacked the server side? So they've got control of your web server at that point. Yeah. Blazor won't help you if somebody's got your web server. The HTTPS protocol will get you the encrypted channel, yeah. I don't know if there's anything beyond that to do. I mean, if you're storing stuff in local storage, you're not going to want to store anything sensitive in plain text, obviously. There are some security things. I'm even a little bit uncomfortable with the idea, like with client-side Blazor, that it's actually downloading your DLLs. It's downloading your code, right? Which is, in a lot of cases, proprietary. But then you think about things like Angular and React and all that. All your code's down there anyway, to a large degree. So that's where you get into interacting with services for anything that you want to keep proprietary, right? So you can think like validation logic. If I want to make sure a string doesn't exceed a certain length and I want to share that kind of business rule between client and server, that's an appropriate thing. If I've got my magic secret sauce, maybe I don't want to send that down in a DLL because somebody's going to be smart and figure out how to decrypt that. And, yep, let's go ahead. Everyone take a break. It is 1:45. Let's go ahead. I don't get a break. I'll keep going. It's 1:45. Let's start up at 7:55. We'll resume. Does that work? Yes, question. The WebSocket is SignalR connection between the client and the browser. One per user. One session per user. Now on the server side, it's managing that hub, right? And we saw that. I didn't walk through front to back the host and all the. I'll walk through all the files maybe after break. Okay, I believe we are good. Let's go ahead and get rolling again. I'm going to trust. I probably should have double checked, but I trust that the recording is still working. Let me go ahead and re-mention that because we are recording it and because the slides will be available, that you really don't need to take a whole lot of pictures or scribble a lot of notes. But let's go ahead and get rolling with the next demo. Oh, you know what? One thing I wanted to talk about too is, again, this is more like way in the weeds, so I don't want to spend too much time on it. But part of my intent here is to make sure everyone fully understands what Blazor is doing, because I know personally for myself, it seemed kind of magical at first, right? Until you start digging through it a lot. So we went through the program file. The program file got us to the startup file. What you see all in here is basically what you'd call middleware or a pipeline. And the order of precedence in this, we're in the configure method. Remember that configure method that gets called and we looked at the environment stuff? Here we're telling it, go ahead and serve up static files. And I want you, if you can find a static file, serve that up before you get to our routing, which is down below on line 52 or so. A static file is simply something like a CSS file, a JavaScript file, an image. So if you can find it that way, then serve it up. If you don't find it, fall through to here and take a look at the routing. And the routing, you know what we did not do? Remember how we put that, let's go ahead and run this again. You know how we put those extra routes on our page in the first demo? Okay, CNUG is fun. Remember we had those like 3 routes that we put on? Does anybody remember what they were? Foo. Foo I can always remember. So if I'm here on counter and I go to foo, it goes there too. If I go home, same thing. If I go to my weather, and then the other one was CNUG. So that's how we could do multiple routes, right? Okay, I meant to show you that. I forgot to show you that. I think I got to get like the right spot there. Okay, now we get down to here. Blazor Hub. Blazor Hub, this is what is setting up that SignalR on the server side, right? So we already saw how the JavaScript file is doing it on the client side. This is the server side. And then it falls back to this page called host. I don't want to spend too much time, but I want you to see this. We go into host, and we see down here, this is that JavaScript file getting served up. This is just like a razor page, right? Components, everything is component-based. We're going to talk a lot about components coming up here. And there's different render modes that have to do with performance. I'm not going to cover them in detail. Just know there's 3 different render modes to take a look at. Then this component that it's starting is of type app. So now let's take a look at what app is, right? App is yet another razor page. App has this thing called a router, so it's setting up this router component. That's what's interpreting those page directives at the top. Whether we're going to foo or CNUG or the home, has a default layout. So this is, if you're coming from like web forms or something, this is equivalent to like a master page as your layout pages, right? So you can have more than one layout page in your application, and different pages can use different layouts. In fact, you can even nest layouts if you want to. So you have one layout page nested in another. Say you're doing a menu and a sub-menu type of scenario. You can do that. So if we take a look at the main layout, which we'll find in shared, when you're writing components that are going to be reused, you put them in a directory like shared. You'll see in the advanced demo I'm using one called components. So if we take a look at main layout goes to, it has a nav menu. So we've got a component within a component. What's the nav menu going to be? That's that thing we're seeing on the left where it has our counter, where it has our weather service. Up at the top, we saw something towards the title bar. That's our nav menu. When you're writing a layout, all your layouts will inherit from layout component base, and a property on layout component base is body. So this little thing here basically tells you I'm going to inject what's called a render fragment. So just think of that like HTML and all that stuff bundled up, your CSS, your processing, your Razor syntax, whatever. That all gets injected here where this body is. So I've got this outer layout, and then I went to my foo page, I went to my weather forecast page. That's going to get injected here, and that is layouts. So now we've sort of walked through, that's going to then come to our index page and inject this stuff. So you see there's like 6 things in a row to get to where you want to be. Now, moving on. Now we're getting into more of the advanced demos, and I'm going to show you a different application. I'm going to describe the application to you. We're going to look at 3 different screens, and then we're going to get into the code that makes all of these happen. So in this case, we've got something that it's an application, and we're an organization that wants to put up an event portal. Think of it kind of like a meetup, right? We're almost recreating meetup. So we're creating these events. And I'm an unauthorized user, so I can log in or I can register if I'm not even registered with the system. And I can just basically do RSVPs, and I can get to more details until I log in. Now this organization, they put on events, but they also have partners that put on events kind of on their behalf. And a partner should have access to events for which they are a partner, but not events that they're not the partner for. Maybe it's a different partner. So partner A should be able to see information about partner A's events. Partner B should be able to see information about partner B's events, but B shouldn't be able to see A's information, right? So in this case, as a partner, we now see that we have a new partner center menu item that showed up. We've got these icons that showed up, but we don't have any icons here because they are not a partner for this one. They're only a partner for this. We see we've got a username greeting over here, and we can create a new event, and we can see the number of reservations. The last screen to show you before we start diving in is that if I'm staff, if I'm an employee of the organization, now I get even more access to stuff, right? Now I've got all my icons on all events because there's no restrictions on what I can see. I can review submissions. So say a partner creates an event, it doesn't go immediately to the public. The public doesn't see it right away. The staff member needs to review it and approve it, and then it will show up on the homepage. And we've got analytics menu. Everyone loves doing analytics, right? So in this demo, we've already talked a little bit about routing. We're going to get into navigation. We're going to talk a little more about the dependency injection. I mentioned how I don't like code in the Razor pages themselves, so I'm going to show you how to do the view model in the MVVM pattern. Binding, we covered a little bit, but it goes a lot deeper. The event lifecycle, I'm going to show you some cool stuff there. This we could spend a lot of time on. We still can interoperate with JavaScript. When you want to reach into one of those JavaScript libraries, you can still do that. And then we'll talk about some caveats related to the HTTP context accessor. Let me see if there's anything else. Okay. So we're going to a completely different demo now. Means I'm going to need a different Visual Studio up. Okay. So let's just go ahead. So we're running our application now. We're running it in IIS. And I'm going to walk through some of these steps that I just talked about, and then we'll go back and examine how all of this works. So here I'm not logged in. I'm an unregistered user. I can see upcoming events. We've got this .NET Conf thing. I can RSVP if I wanted to. We've got a nice modal dialog that pops up for that. I can look at past events. There's some past event there, but I really can't do a whole lot. So let me go ahead and log in. And I don't want to log in as Paul, I want to log in as a partner first. Partner was the next level of access. So now as a partner, my partner center menu item showed up. I'm obviously not a partner for this event, otherwise I would see some information here. Now let's go ahead and try, we see that we've got this. I can create event now. So I can enter some information on that and create the event, log out. Let's say I wanted to associate that partner with an event. Then I might not log in as staff instead of partner. Again, that next level of access. Now all my icons show up. We can see who's on the roster, stuff like that. I can now review an event submission. So somebody submitted an event. Here's a CNUG meetup. That looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and approve it. Do you see how fast this stuff is going as far as you're not seeing long postbacks happening? That's that efficiency of that SignalR channel back and forth. So now our event has shown up. Let me go ahead and log out. I want to log in as an admin now. Now we've got this users menu. And say I wanted to assign this person's staff as a partner. We get a toast notification saying this user doesn't have a partner role. So there's some business roles in there, right? If I'm staff, there's no reason for me to be associated as a partner to any events because I already have access to everything. So let's go ahead and assign this partner as a partner. Wait a sec. Why does that say staff? Pretty sure I clicked on partner. Let me go back. Assign the part. Nope, that definitely says staff. Does anybody know what's going on here? A bug? Cached. Let me refresh. That's something cool about the SignalR2 is you can have the deep linking, right? I have a link. It went right back to where I was. It's actually none of that. I'm sort of tricking you all. All that functionality you just saw is not real. Let me show you how I'm doing it. Remember we talked about dependency injection? I'm using something called memory providers or in-memory providers. And I'll show you how that works in a minute. What we like to do is we like to create sample data. All that you saw was just sample data running in a memory service. I didn't need a backend. I didn't need an API. Now I'm firing it up and I'm actually connecting to a database, a SQL Server database. But you can see how you could do a demo for someone, for stakeholders pretty quickly without having to set up all that infrastructure. I'm going to show you some of the classes that set up that data. Let's do that now. Well, that's firing up. So you see these services and this dependency injection. Where are we? We're in our configure services method. This is where I'm telling Blazor, where I'm telling ASP.NET Core, these are the services that I want to use. I want to use loggers. I want to use this event portal context for my entity framework. This claims transformation is interesting. That has to do with authorization and security. We saw these two in our last simple demo, right? And here's how I'm getting modal dialogues. Here's how I'm doing something for localization. Here's how I can do stuff with local storage. Remember you saw those toast notifications? They're all just services that I register, and then I can call properties on them in C# and have that kind of functionality that we saw work. Down here, what I'm doing, what you just saw, I have interfaces. I programmed against interfaces, and I'm swapping out in the green as you see the memory service, and now I've got database services. But because they all adhere to the same interface, it's all just going to work as long as I have programmed the functionality for that. Let's take a look at what memory service looks like. We were in partner memory service. Just got some random data that's set up here. It's actually technically in the base. But this, when it starts up, it says load sample data. Okay, I want to clear what I had, and then I want to load sample data collections. Let me take a look at, I'm just newing up model objects, right? And then down here you saw .NET Comp. Join us for a day, do this, do that, right? I'm just putting some random HTML in here. When does the event start? This is just sample data, not in a database. Yes, Robin. So it's still doing SignalR. And yes, it was not communicating with the database, so it's kind of cheating on how fast it is, right? The question there is just your database latency. But it's always going over that SignalR connection, even if it's a memory server. Yeah, we're going to run it now. Yeah, we'll see. And it's still going to be fast. Don't worry. Even though we're recording video at the same time. Yes, sir. Yes, we actually, believe me, there's 50 slides in here. We're going to go back to modals. We'll go back to toast notifications, all that. So I think the question there is, can we do more Blazor specific stuff? This applies to everything, and that's fair. Let's go ahead and run through here. Let's see, now we have different events. We have past events. It's still not slow. We log in. We logged in there before as this. We went to users. We clicked on staff. We can't do that. We click on partner. Now we have data, right? So the implementation has been changed. Let's see. Slide stuff, binding, variables and properties. So that was dependency injection. Let's cover a little bit about navigation. Let's talk about routing and navigation. Like I said, really messy slides. Don't do this when you're doing a slide presentation. This is more of a mini reference guide for you guys when you download the presentation. But I'm going to talk about what we're going to explore in some of the code. So if you want to link from one place to another, in the application, there's a couple ways to do it. One of the ways is with this navlink component up here, and that's really just like an anchor tag. You could just write an anchor tag. The difference is when Blazor sees that the URL matches your href here, it'll add this active class onto it. So you can do some CSS type of work for when the page that they're looking at matches the link that they just went to. The other way you can do it is via code, right? Programmatically. So there's this thing called Navigation Manager, and how would I get a Navigation Manager? I would inject it. I would inject that, and then I can use it, and I can call this navigate to some page. When you're working with routes, you also have the concept of a route constraint. So think of this just like a regular API. You might use an MVC. This is going to be a parameter, my event ID, and I want it to be an integer. Match this route if what you have can be converted to an integer. How does it know what pages or what components are available for the routing engine? The answer for that is here, where that router component that we took a look at a couple minutes ago says add everything in program. Program was that file we first opened in our app. Scan it for all this stuff, and it'll go ahead and add anything that has that, say, page with the routing in it to its in-memory routing table. One of the cool things that they've added as far as functionality too is the ability to write components in a completely different assembly. So somebody else could even provide that assembly, and they do. A lot of the stuff that's being used, like the modal and all that, people write that in another assembly and they package up into a NuGet package. You reference that NuGet package, and if you do that, you can also just say, I want additional assemblies to be scanned for my routing table. Okay, this is going to get into a whole nother thing. So let's just take a look at some of what this looks like in code. So here's a navlink example, right? Now what are we doing here? This is in our nav menu. So remember, this was part of our layout page. So it's going to be that menu down the left side. And we see here that we've got a link to this conference event list, and then I'm passing in, this must be past events, right? So I'm passing in some parameters. It's telling it to go off to the database and give me something from anything between 5 years ago and today. Basically, those become my parameters. This here is making little icons, which is not necessarily a Blazor thing. Let's go ahead and take a look at this conference event list page. Where are we at? Pages, conference event. Yes, in my web project, the dependency. Oh yes, these up here. We've got a lot of packages. I'm doing some stuff for localization, modals, toasts. A grid is in here, right? Some of this stuff comes by default. I'm using identity for authentication. Node at time is definitely something we should talk about. Logging is definitely something we should talk about. Logging is not necessarily specifically Blazor based, but it's interesting. So the question is there any sort of nice imports discovery mechanism like there is in Angular so you know what you're looking for? Let's find out. I've actually honestly not had that problem because I kind of know like I want a toast notification, so I know what I'm importing there. But we'll have to try and see if IntelliSense comes with anything there. When you are doing stuff like this, what you're doing, let me show you this page here. What I'm looking for is my imports.razor. What I can do is I can just reference all of this stuff here. And what I've done, and this could be a questionable whether it's best practice or not, but I have all these pages related to conference events, and they all use view models. So if I take a look at my view model, I think we were just going to take a look at a conference event list. So let's maybe, I'll have all of mine inherit from a base class, right? And even that base class event inherits from another base class, and I have my injects here. So when I want to use my logger, it's already available to me in my view model. When I want to, I'm sorry, in this case it's a logger factory technically, and then I create a logger. When I want the modal surface, it's there, right? So if I want to do something with Navigation Manager, I want to do something with modal service. Let me go ahead and stop this for a second. I'll just say toast service. So because it's all C#, and because I've already injected whatever it is I need, and I need to know like that my toast service was registered, right? So that happened in startup. I should have a toast service in here somewhere. Let's just search for it. Why am I not finding that here? Oh, because I switched over to a host file, that's why. So when I do this, it really just calls something like this. I put in as a comment when I'm doing my modal service. And it's just registering when I call for an iModal service, give me the modal service, which comes from an external component that I've injected. So now if I'm in any of my pages here and I want to make use of that in, say, some method, let's just pick one here. This is really a bad example, but let's go ahead and just say I wanted to use that. I just say toast service dot, and it comes up with what it is that I want to do. So I'm not sure if that directly answers your question, but they are there. They're not hard to find. And I have full IntelliSense on what it is I want to do with that component. That's a really, yep. So the short answer to that is, let's try this. Blazor modal. The question is, how did I know to register that in startup? The short answer is that they give you instructions on NuGet to tell you exactly what you need to do. So it says, hey, when you want to use Blazor modal, come to your configure services and call this. I would, yes. You can certainly look in the Blazor documentation. I actually have a whole slide on resources. The other thing I would suggest is that you download Paul Schroeder's CNUG presentation from January, because it's got tons of slides with links to everything. Yes, in old web forms, the question is, there's drag and drop controls in old web forms. There's nothing like that. The answer is, of course there is, because the community has created that for us. Let's go ahead and start this guy back up. Maybe I even, let's see here. I want to actually start this in Kestrel, because I want to show something else next, and I don't want to run out of time. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead. Hopefully this thing still compiles. I should double check that since I was messing with it. I'm not sure what error we had. One of them was intentional, where I was just pretending there was an error so I could demonstrate that it looked like a pretty full functioning application, even though I was only messing around in memory versus actually using the database, and how easy it is if you use interface-based programming to swap out that. So if you needed to do a demo, what you're seeing in these pages is a mix of Razor and the Blazor and CSS and HTML. That's how you do it. You can also do it programmatically. MVC is technically kind of like this, a little different design, but it's not that different from what we're doing. If you already know MVC, then you're going to know how to do this. Like I said, I was doing a project and I ended up finishing it like a month ahead of time because I thought it was going to take me a lot longer to learn Blazor, and it just flowed. We were at localhost and 5001. So if we take a look now at our server, let's see here, starting web host. I was pretty sure that that compiled. 5001. We're in our directory, starting web host. Let me kill that. Let me make sure I don't have any other ones open. I'm pretty sure I hit enter there. Oh, helps if you hit enter, I guess. Localization. Let's talk about localization now. One of the things that you have to deal with, this is going to be one of those differences between client-side and server-side Blazor. One of the things you have to deal with often in applications is, hey, my customer's in this time zone, I'm in this time zone, the data's in UTC, whatever, how do I figure that out? So one of the problems is that there's this thing called node time, and node time is what you get out of a browser, and that's represented here. You get strings out of a browser saying, I'm in America, Chicago. This is a whole thing here as to why this doesn't show up. If I want to log a user's time zone, I've got a button click here that's going to do that. And we see that the time zone that the browser knows is America, Chicago. But there's this whole thing with Windows time zones. And Windows will tell us that their time zone is Central Standard Time. The problem is, if we need to know that time zone, and we're on the server side, because we're using server-side Blazor, we don't have access to the client where we could just call a JavaScript function and do that. But what we can do is use JavaScript interop from server-side Blazor to call into the client and get that information. What we see here is I'm taking that information and writing it to a cookie. So I know the next time they come, technically I can update it the time when they hit the page the first time every time if I wanted, but in this case I think I'm just setting a cookie and saving it for a while. And this gets into globalization and localization. Let me see if there's anything important here. So what we'll see is some functions here where we can call things using this node-time library to convert things to UTC and from UTC. And if you want to know more about that, there's a link down here for nodetime.org. I don't need a resource file for this, but you will see as we looked at the dependencies before, there's node time. right? So I'm referencing a NuGet package for that. If we take a look at noted time, we're going to be looking at date time resolve options, local UCC. So where is our startup? Let's see if we have a noted time. So we are on this page here, user culture info. So we are injecting this browser date time provider, and we're making use of it down below. This is another package. And what I want to demonstrate here is, do you see how these are variables? Well, you won't see that because they need to be declared again. This is using a view model. Let me take a little reset here. We talked about the MVVM pattern. In the MVVM pattern, we inherit from another class. I don't like putting code in the same page. I like having it separated out. Other people might like code in the page. But in this case, I'm using this user culture info VM, or a view model. And I'm injecting this here. So let's take a look at what that view model is doing. This is how you would separate that out. And we see these variables being declared. And what I'm trying to demonstrate here is a difference between using variables and using properties in your view model. So we've got these set. We've got down here, we're binding to this culture info display name, name, date, etc. There's some variables. Here we're binding to things that are in my base class, which is a user's local time zone and a user's local time. What I wanted to show here too is, I'm going to have to uncomment some code. Yes, Robin. What's your question? Oh, wow. Okay, yeah, you're getting like 4 slides ahead. So the question is like, how do you get values from like parent to children and whatnot? And the answer to that has to do with something called cascading parameters and values. We do have a slide on that. I'm probably going to start, well, we are actually running out of time, aren't we, Dave? Let me just run through this really quick and then we'll start burning through slides. And I want to leave a few minutes because we got to be out of here by about 9 o'clock. I'm sorry, probably spent too much time on questions there. Let's go ahead and this is an on after render async. I'm just going to go through the events real quick because we're going to need to wrap up. And my slides will probably tell more than what you need to know. But let's take a look at the event life cycles. Okay. I apologize. This, I could take days probably to cover everything you need to know. Here's the event lifecycle: on initialized async, on parameter set. This gets called multiple times. So when you have a parameter that's getting passed in, which I should definitely show you in code, I want you to at least see what that's like. So you want to pass a parameter in, it's like this. If you want to pass in a cascading parameter, it's like that. Whoever has the drag and drop question, hit me up after and I can show you how drag and drop works. But yes, there's actually an implementation of that. And then the other thing to answer the question, let's see here, should be coming up. On after render is something that happens after it's rendered in the client browser. So if you've got to interop with JavaScript, that's where you're going to do it, right? In the browser. And how do you do that? Let's take a look at JS runtime. So here's how I have a function, and I'm calling JS runtime. Again, this gets injected as a service, just like everything else. And I've got this Blazor extensions.log user's time zone. Where does that come from? My www root folder, global functions, and I wrote something in here. This is just standard JavaScript, right? Where I can write a cookie out. Here's log user's time zone, where I'm just calling this method, etc. Right? The other thing that's cool is that you can write methods just to handle forms. I wish we had like another hour or two to go through all this. Let's see here. HTTP context accessor, there's a caveat with this. It works and it's available. This is how you get information about, say, the cookies. There's something where it may not work well in server-side Blazor in production, but it'll work fine on developers' machines. So make sure you experiment and test that. Structuring for separation of concerns and memory providers, state management we got to talk about. Just basically break apart your project, separate things out. We're using services in a separate service project, models, domain classes, our data access classes are separated out. This is how we did the swapping between memory services and database services. State management was a big question. So this is important. There's multiple ways. Remember how the counter lost its counter when we switched between pages? Well, that's because it was actually ignoring it. You can also do in-memory where you're saving that information between pages. Local storage can be used. You can access the local storage APIs to do that. Or what's typical is you can call an API. When I change something in the browser and I make that call to the server that they input a form, take that form information and save it to a database. So that's how you can manage state. There's some things about encrypted state here, some links for you. Components, everything is a component, right? Dan Roth has a good talk on some of this, doing a star ratings NuGet package. So remember I said you can take code, put it in a completely separate library. So he made something, you can do 1 through 5 stars to rate something. Then you can package that up and give it to someone else and they can use it in their app just by importing that NuGet package. Robin, this answers your question. How do you get something from a parent to a child? It's this cascading values and cascading parameters. So you just set up this little syntax, and then remember we talked about injecting content in certain areas. Everything that exists within here can now have access to this value. They just have to know what the name is and what the type's going to be. The parent has to pass the information in. And then there's binding. So if you change that value, I believe it'll propagate that if that's what you're asking. It'll know. Blazor layouts, we talked about the layouts in depth already. Font Awesome, we didn't get a chance to do it, but again, I have a slide on this. Material design, modal dialogues, toast. So if you want to add Font Awesome, you simply just right-click in your WW root area, either in the lib or CSS, wherever you want to put it. You have to add this to your host file. Here's a Stack Overflow question. Basically, you have a choice. You can add either CSS or the JS file. The JS file seems to work a little bit better, but you don't want to reference both of them. So you're going to do this one or you're going to do this one, but not both. And I'd probably recommend that one. Matte Blazor, another component. If you want to do material design, if you know what material design is there, it just makes your input controls look a little bit nicer. So here's how you could do something with a radio group. You can do up-down fields, date pickers, stuff like that. It's fully documented at the NuGet library, so we don't need to cover it here. I just want you to know it exists. Edit form, very similar type of thing. Everything works off of this thing called edit context. So if I want to make a form and I've got controls within that form, I start up with one of these and I give it a model class, right? And then for validation, I just do this data annotations validator, validation summary, and it works. Now, all these components, here's another point. All these components are written by other people and donated by the community, right? So I wrote this app like maybe 2 months ago or so, and then I went to go update it for the talk over the weekend. Well, guess what? Everybody had updated their stuff in the meantime. I updated my stuff, and things broke. So I had to spend some time fixing it. Nothing major, but just know people change their APIs over time, right? So if you're dependent on somebody's library, obviously you can stay on the same version, but you won't get advantage of all the new functionality. Modal dialogues, here's how you do modal dialogues. Again, fully documented at GitHub, Blazor/modal. Toast notifications, here's how you do toast notifications. It's as simple as once you've injected that service, just calling I want to show info, and there's a configuration thing that you can say, here's where I want it to show up on the screen, like top, bottom, left, right. No, Blazor's not a Microsoft thing. So a guy by the name of Chris Sainty has been writing Blazor components kind of furiously, it seems. So he's done a lot of these. And I think he got awarded a Microsoft MVP this year for all that work. And actually, he was one of the speakers on Tuesday's .NET Conf as well. Safe storage of app secrets. All this stuff is not necessarily Blazor specific, but there's just ways where you shouldn't be putting your connection strings in web config, right? You're injecting your DB context or you're using services. I recommend strongly typing your config settings. With the Serilog log configuration, I recommend pushing a username in there as well. So when you're logging the username that is associated with each event. You can query JSON and SQL Server. Again, not specific to Blazor. So let's just burn through these. You've got the slides if you're interested in them, or just email me. I'd be happy to direct you in the right place. When you do the additional properties there, you can see how I'm using JSON here to query this field that gets logged in a structured format, and then I'm using in SQL Server specifically this syntax to query that out, and here's what it looks like when you query it. We're not going to be able to cover any of this tonight. Claims transformations, this is kind of interesting. If you want to take a claims identity and add claims to it. So we have partners, right? Somebody can have a partner role, but which partners do they have access to? That we do through a claims transformation. When they log in, we know who they are. Now I can look up the partners associated with that user and inject it as a claim through this add claim down here. So if you want information on that, Google or Bing the iClaims transformation. Incorporating this is all additional stuff. This testing Blazor components is a good thing to check out. Two-way interop was another session I thought was pretty good from Tuesday. This is just saying, this is a post I think Robin did on our blog at MSC Tech, which demonstrated sharing code between Xamarin and Blazor applications. I think it was done a little while ago, but it still applies. Here's resources. So if you're looking for more resources, and again, you can always email me if you get stuck on something. I'll point you in the right direction. The slide deck is available already right now. MSC Tech/blog, and I'll get Dave a copy too. We could post it on the CNUG site or whatever. And that's a wrap. Thank you, everyone. Don't forget to register if you do want a CodeGen Hero license.